Families of the graduating SEAL candidates, please stand. The stadium rose as one. Applause thundered across the parade ground. Flags snapped violently in the wind. Cameras lifted, shutters firing like distant gunshots. The Navy band struck a sharp, commanding note that cut straight through the noise. Ethan Hale stood. No one clapped near him. His parents leaned forward, eyes locked on the stage, pride radiating from every movement. His mother squeezed her husband's arm and said, without turning, front row seats. I told you this ceremony would be worth it. Then, quieter, but not quiet enough, she added, at least one of our sons made something of himself. Ethan didn't respond. His posture didn't change. He kept his hands behind his back, shoulders squared, gaze steady. On the stage, a name rang out. Lieutenant Mark Hale. The reaction was instant. Cheers exploded, whistles, a standing ovation. His younger brother jogged forward in immaculate dress blues, the newly earned trident catching the sun as it was pinned to his chest. His father laughed, voice thick with pride. That's what commitment looks like. A few people nearby glanced at Ethan, puzzled. He didn't look like a guest. He didn't look impressed either. He didn't even look at the stage. His eyes were fixed on the officers' section. That's when it happened. A senior general, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, his uniform heavy with decades of command, stopped scanning the ceremony. His gaze locked onto Ethan. The noise faded. For one measured second, the general studied him. Then, in full view of the crowd, the general stepped forward and raised his hand. A formal salute. Directed at Ethan Hale, the applause collapsed into stunned silence. Ethan's parents turned sharply. His mother's smile froze. His father's breath caught. Ethan returned the salute, precise, restrained, unmistakably practiced. And for the first time that day he spoke. Now, he said quietly, this gets complicated. The silence didn't last long. It never did at events like this. Shock had a short lifespan when pride was on the line. Whispers spread first, low, confused, sharp around the edges. People leaned toward each other, eyes flicking between Ethan and the stage as if trying to solve a puzzle they hadn't known existed 5 seconds earlier. Phones came back up. Someone laughed nervously. Applause restarted in scattered pockets, weaker this time, uncertain of its target. Ethan lowered his hand from the salute and returned to stillness. His parents were staring at him now. Not with pride, not with understanding, with alarm. What was that? His father asked under his breath, forcing a smile for the people around them. Why would a general salute you? Ethan didn't answer. His mother's voice followed immediately, tight and sharp. Did you do something? Say something to someone? On the field, the ceremony moved on. Another name was called. Another family erupted into cheers. Life continued with brutal efficiency, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Ethan stayed silent. That silence unsettled them more than any explanation could have. His father leaned closer, teeth clenched. This is Mark's day. Don't make it about you. Ethan finally turned his head. Then stop asking, he said calmly. The words landed wrong, too controlled, too confident. His mother straightened, offended. After all we've done, you can't even answer a simple question? Before he could respond, his brother's voice carried from the stage, amplified, proud, emotional. I want to thank my parents, Mark said, for believing in me, for pushing me, for always knowing I could do this. The crowd applauded again, louder now. Ethan watched his parents soak it in like warmth after a long winter. His mother wiped her eyes. His father nodded repeatedly, chest swelling. For a moment, the confusion faded from their faces, replaced by something familiar and comfortable. Validation, Mark continued. Everything I am, I owe to them. Ethan looked down at the concrete beneath his shoes. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He simply breathed. A woman seated behind them leaned forward and whispered, "Is that your other son?" "Yes," his mother said quickly, the pride in her voice returning, but altered. "He went a different direction." The pause before different was deliberate. Ethan felt it like a pressure change. The woman nodded politely, then added, "Still, that salute was strange." His father laughed it off. Probably a mistake. You know how these ceremonies are. Ethan almost smiled at that. Almost. The ceremony finally concluded. Families surged toward the field, breaking formation, chasing hugs and photographs. Laughter rose again, loud and careless. Mark rushed over, trident gleaming. He stopped when he reached Ethan. For a second, neither of them spoke. "What was that about?" Mark asked quietly. No anger, just confusion. The salute. Ethan met his brother's eyes, saw pride there, and uncertainty, and something else, fear maybe, that the spotlight might shift. "It wasn't about you," Ethan said. Mark frowned. "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting today." Their parents arrived moments later. You embarrassed us, his mother said immediately, her voice low but shaking. People were staring. I stood still, Ethan replied. You did the rest. His father stepped in front of Mark, instinctive, protective. If you're playing some kind of game… I'm not, Ethan said. A shadow passed over the officers' section. The general was speaking to a cluster of senior commanders now. One of them glanced toward Ethan, then another. Ethan felt it before he saw it. Attention. Measured, intentional. He turned slightly, positioning himself where his family could no longer block his view of the officers. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. One message. Stand by. Do not leave the area. Ethan exhaled slowly. Behind him, his mother was still talking, apologizing to someone, explaining, controlling the narrative. Ethan didn't correct her. He simply stood where he was, because whatever they thought this day was about, it hadn't reached its most uncomfortable part yet. Ethan didn't move. Around him, the ceremony grounds dissolved into motion. Families laughing too loudly, graduates posing for photographs. The metallic clink of medals as proud hands touched them again and again. The noise had returned, but it felt thinner now, stretched over something unresolved. Ethan's attention stayed fixed on the officers' section. The general was gone. In his place stood a cluster of senior commanders, their conversation tight and purposeful. One of them, a colonel with sharp eyes and a scar cutting through his right eyebrow, turned just enough to look directly at Ethan. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He nodded. Once, the kind of nod that wasn't polite. It was procedural. Ethan acknowledged it with a subtle shift of his stance. Nothing anyone else would notice. Nothing that could be photographed or questioned. His mother followed his gaze and stiffened. Why are they looking over here? They're not, his father said quickly. You're imagining things. Ethan said nothing. Mark was still standing close, helmet tucked under his arm, the trident heavy against his chest. You know those officers? He asked, keeping his voice low. No. The answer was technically true. Before Mark could push further, a uniformed aide approached from the side, weaving through families with practiced efficiency. He stopped directly in front of Ethan. Sir, the aide said, voice neutral, eyes forward. Please remain available. Ethan nodded. Understood. The aide turned and left without another word. Silence fell in a tight radius around them. Mark blinked. He just called you sir. It's a habit, Ethan replied. His mother's face tightened. This is getting ridiculous. On the far side of the field, photographers were setting up for the official group shot. Commands echoed. Line up. Step forward. Hold position. Ethan stayed where he was. His father grabbed his arm. We're leaving, he said. Now, before this turns into something embarrassing. Ethan gently but firmly removed his father's hand. The movement was small, controlled, final. I can't, he said. Why not? His mother demanded. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he watched as the colonel broke from the group and began walking toward them. The colonel moved differently from the others. Not rushed, not stiff. Every step was deliberate, his presence cutting a clean path through the crowd. Conversations faltered as he passed. People straightened without realizing why. He stopped in front of Ethan. Good to see you again, the colonel said quietly. Ethan met his eyes. Likewise, sir. The colonel's gaze flicked briefly to Ethan's family. He didn't acknowledge them. You weren't supposed to be visible today. I wasn't, Ethan replied. That wasn't my call. A faint smile tugged at the colonel's mouth. No, it never is. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Excuse me, he said. Is there a problem? The colonel finally looked at him. His eyes softened just a fraction. No, Lieutenant. Quite the opposite. He turned back to Ethan. We're adjusting the schedule. Ethan nodded once. I'll stand by. The colonel lowered his voice further. General wants full compliance. No deflection. Understood. The colonel stepped back, already disengaging. When called, step forward alone. Alone. The words settled like weight. As the colonel walked away, Ethan's mother found her voice again. Who are you? She asked, half angry, half afraid. What is going on? Ethan looked at her. Really looked at her. I told you, he said evenly. This day wasn't about me. But now, he added, turning his eyes back toward the officers' section as the general reappeared, it's not just about Mark anymore either. The general lifted a hand, signaling for attention. Microphones were adjusted. The crowd quieted once more. Ethan straightened. Whatever had stayed hidden for years was about to surface. Not by his choice, not on his terms, but under command. And once orders were given, there would be no taking them back. The general's voice had not yet returned to the microphone, but the air had already changed. Ethan felt it the way he always did, before briefings, before operations, before moments that couldn't be undone, the subtle tightening in his chest. the narrowing of everything unnecessary. Around him, families shifted impatiently. Graduates adjusted their uniforms. A photographer called out instructions that no one fully followed. Ethan stepped a few feet away from his parents. Not dramatically, just enough. His mother noticed immediately. "Don't walk off," she hissed. We're not finished talking." Ethan didn't stop. He didn't argue. He simply created space. That space was where he had lived for years. He stood near the edge of the field, close enough to hear the ceremony, far enough to be alone. The sun reflected sharply off the concrete, forcing him to narrow his eyes. The heat didn't bother him. It rarely did. Behind the noise, behind the movement, another world pressed quietly at the edges of his mind. Rooms with no windows, screens filled with shifting data, voices stripped of names, reduced to call signs and timestamps. No applause, no crowds, just consequences. A voice cut through his thoughts. "You're early." Ethan didn't turn. "You said to remain available." Colonel Mason stepped beside him, hands clasped behind his back, eyes forward. Up close, the scar along his brow looked older than Ethan remembered. "I said don't be visible," Mason replied. "That salute complicated things." "The general chose it," Ethan said. Mason exhaled through his nose. "He did. And he doesn't do anything without intent." They stood in silence for a moment, watching Mark pose for photos with their parents. Pride radiated from the group like heat. Mason spoke again. "You could have avoided this ceremony." "So could you," Ethan replied. Mason's mouth twitched. "Fair." Ethan finally looked at him. "Why now?" Mason's gaze stayed fixed ahead. "Because people are alive who shouldn't be. And people want to know why." Ethan absorbed that without reaction. "I didn't authorize disclosure," he said. "You didn't," Mason agreed. "But the general did." On the field, the microphone crackled as technicians made final adjustments. Mason lowered his voice. "You spent years ensuring your name stayed out of reports. You refused commendations. You declined promotions that came with visibility. I followed protocol," Ethan said. "You rewrote protocol," Mason corrected. Quietly, Ethan watched as a small group of SEALs approached Mark, clapping him on the back. Brotherhood, celebration, everything Ethan had never asked for. "Your family doesn't know," Mason said. "No," Ethan replied. "They don't." Mason glanced at him, searching his face. "Do you want them to?" The question lingered. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He thought of nights where silence was survival, of missions where a name on paper could get someone killed, of choosing obscurity not out of fear, but out of responsibility. "Wanting it," Ethan said finally, "has never been relevant." Mason nodded slowly. "That's what I told the general." "And?" Ethan asked. Mason's eyes hardened. He said relevance changes. The crowd began to quiet again, sensing something unscripted was coming. Graduates drifted back toward formation. Families returned to their seats. Mason straightened. "When you're called, you will step forward alone. No disclaimers, no deflection." Ethan nodded. "I understand." Mason paused, then added, "For what it's worth, this won't erase what it cost you." Ethan's expression didn't change. "I never expected it to." Mason stepped away, disappearing back into the officers' section. Ethan remained where he was. Across the field, his mother scanned the crowd, irritation etched into her face. His father said something sharp to Mark, gesturing in Ethan's direction. Mark looked over, uncertainty clouding his earlier pride. Ethan met his brother's eyes. There was no resentment there. No competition, only distance. The microphone clicked on. The general stepped forward. Ethan adjusted his stance, aligning himself with the sound of that voice. Whatever had remained unseen, every decision, every sacrifice, every erased trace was about to be dragged into daylight. Not as a confession, as a report, and reports once delivered could never be taken back. The general didn't speak right away. He stood at the podium, hands resting lightly on either side, scanning the crowd with a patience that felt deliberate, almost surgical. Conversations faded one by one. Even the children sensed it. The wind tugged at the flags behind him, the fabric snapping sharply in the growing quiet. Ethan felt every second stretch. His parents sat rigid now, eyes flicking between the stage and him. His mother's fingers twisted the edge of her program until the paper bent. His father's jaw worked as if he were chewing on words he couldn't release. Mark had rejoined his unit, standing in line with the other graduates. His posture was perfect, but his focus wasn't on the horizon anymore. It was on Ethan. The general finally leaned toward the microphone. "Today," he said evenly, "we celebrate achievement that can be recognized." Applause followed automatically, conditioned. But the general continued, lifting a hand slightly. "There is also achievement that cannot." The applause faltered. Ethan didn't move. He kept his gaze forward, fixed just past the podium. He had learned long ago that attention could be survived if you didn't chase it. The general's eyes swept the stands again, slower this time. Some service, he went on, is designed to remain unseen, not because it lacks value, but because its value depends on silence. A ripple moved through the audience. Confusion, curiosity. Ethan's mother leaned toward his father. What is he talking about? His father shook his head. This isn't part of the program. The general adjusted his stance. On rare occasions, he said, that silence must be broken. Not for recognition, but for clarity. Ethan felt the shift before it happened. A subtle tightening in the space around him. Officers straightening, aides repositioning. His phone vibrated once more in his pocket. Stand fast, await verbal. He inhaled slowly. On the field, Mark swallowed hard. The pride on his face had been replaced by uncertainty, by the awareness that something larger than his moment was unfolding. He glanced back at his parents, then at Ethan. The general's voice remained calm, controlled. Lieutenant Mark Hale, he said, turning slightly, you and your class have earned every commendation you received today. Applause returned, strong but uneven. Mark nodded, visibly relieved. Then the general continued. But I would be remiss, he said, to let this ceremony conclude without acknowledging another form of service connected to this very family. The word family landed like a dropped weight. Ethan's mother froze. The general turned his head, not toward the graduates, but toward the stands. Ethan Hale, he said clearly. Every sound died. Ethan stepped forward. Not rushed, not hesitant. The movement alone drew eyes. People leaned forward, craned their necks, whispered names they'd just heard for the first time. His parents stood abruptly. What are you doing? His mother whispered, panic edging her voice. Ethan didn't look at her. He walked down the aisle, past rows of stunned families, past cameras that now followed him instinctively. The concrete felt solid beneath his feet, familiar, reliable. He stopped where the general indicated, alone, centered, exposed. The general looked at him for a long moment. No smile, no dramatics, just assessment. Most people here, the general said, will never hear the details of Mr. Hale's service. A murmur spread. But they will understand its weight. He stepped closer to the microphone. Mr. Hale, the general said, voice carrying across the field, has served in capacities where rank is concealed, records are sealed, and success is measured not in medals but in survival. Ethan's parents stared at him as if he were a stranger. His father's lips parted, but no sound came out. The general paused. This acknowledgement, he said, is not a reward. It is a correction. He turned fully toward Ethan. Stand by. Ethan nodded once. Around them, applause began again, but this time it wasn't celebratory. It was restrained, respectful, and heavy with the understanding that whatever was coming next would permanently change how this family, and everyone watching, understood. The man standing alone on that field, Ethan kept his eyes forward, because blood might define where you came from, but service defined who you answered to. The applause died on its own, not abruptly, no sharp cutoff, but like a tide pulling back, leaving behind unease instead of excitement. People stopped clapping when they realized no one else was clapping either. Hands lowered. Voices faded. Cameras remained raised, unsure whether to keep recording or put themselves away. The general waited for full silence. He got it. Before I continue, he said, voice calm but absolute, I want to be very clear about something. He turned slightly, gesturing toward Ethan without looking at him. This acknowledgement was not requested. A ripple moved through the stands. It was not planned by Mr. Hale, the general continued, and it is not a favor. Ethan stood motionless, eyes forward, spine aligned, every instinct focused on restraint. This was the part most people never understood a being seen required, more discipline than hiding ever had. The general took a step away from the podium. This, he said, is a matter of command responsibility. Ethan's mother felt the words before she understood them. Command. Her breath came shallow. She looked at her husband, then back at Ethan, searching his face for something familiar, an explanation, an apology, a hint that this was all a misunderstanding. She found none. The general clasped his hands behind his back and addressed the crowd as if delivering a briefing. For years, Mr. Hale operated under a restricted designation. His authority did not come from visible rank, but from direct tasking. That distinction matters. He paused, letting it settle. Because when orders are given under such conditions, they supersede appearances. Mark's mouth went dry. He had trained his entire adult life to understand hierarchy, rank, protocol, chain of command, but nothing in his training had prepared him for the idea that his older brother, standing there in a civilian suit, might exist outside of the system. He'd just fought so hard to enter, The general turned his head slightly. "Lieutenant Hale," he said. Mark snapped to attention instinctively. "Sir, you were selected for SEAL training based on performance, aptitude and resilience," the general said. "Your record stands on its own." Mark swallowed. "Yes, sir." The general nodded once, then, "However," he added, "there were operations during your training cycle that succeeded, because decisions were made beyond your visibility." Mark's eyes flicked just once toward Ethan. Ethan did not look back. The general faced the crowd again. "There are individuals whose role is not to be known," he said. "Not because they are less, but because exposure compromises function." He stepped back toward the podium. "Today," he continued, "we are not dismantling that structure." A breath of relief moved through the officers' section. "But we are clarifying it." The general lifted a sealed folder from the podium. No markings, no insignia, just weight. This ceremony brought together operational units, command staff, and family members, he said. That convergence creates context. Context. Ethan understood immediately. The general opened the folder. "Mr. Hale," he said, "step forward." Ethan took one measured step. The movement alone caused a visible reaction. A few officers straightened sharply. One aide stopped mid-motion. Even the wind seemed to pause. The general looked directly at him now. "For the duration of this address," he said, "your authority will be recognized at its appropriate level." Ethan met his gaze. "Understood." The general turned to the audience. "To be explicit," he said, "any orders previously issued by Mr. Hale in joint operations, including those affecting naval special warfare, were issued within full scope of authorization." His mother's hand flew to her mouth. His father sat down hard, as if his legs had stopped working. Mark felt something collapse quietly inside his chest. Not pride. Not jealousy, but certainty. The certainty that the hierarchy he believed he understood had just shifted beneath his feet. The general closed the folder. "We will not discuss specifics," he said. "We will not display records." He paused. "But we will not pretend anymore." He faced Ethan one final time. "Stand ready." Ethan nodded. The words were simple, familiar, but everyone watching could feel it now. Whatever rank Ethan Hale carried, it wasn't symbolic. It was operational. And once a chain of command was acknowledged publicly, it could never be unseen again. The general didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Silence had already surrendered to him. "Mr. Hale," he said, turning fully toward Ethan. "Remain at attention." Ethan complied instantly. Feet aligned, spine straight, chin level, not rigid, ready. The posture was unmistakable to anyone who had ever served under real command. The general faced the crowd again. "There are misconceptions," he said calmly, "about what authority looks like." He paused, letting the weight of that sentence sink in. Most people associate rank with visibility, insignia, ceremony, position. But some ranks are designed to disappear. Not because they are minor, but because they are decisive. A murmur rippled through the stands. Ethan's mother shook her head slowly, as if refusing what her eyes were already confirming. Her son, the one she had dismissed, corrected, compared, was standing at the center of a military formation, as if he belonged there more than anyone else. The general gestured toward the officers' section. "Several individuals present today," he said, "have executed operations under Mr. Hale's directive authority." A few heads turned. An admiral nodded once. A commander straightened sharply. The crowd noticed. The general continued. "Those operations prevented escalation events, neutralized active threats, and extracted personnel who would otherwise not be standing here today." Mark felt his pulse spike. Extracted personnel. His mind raced backward through training. Stories classified. Briefings that ended abruptly. Missions attributed to external coordination. Successes with no visible source. His eyes locked onto Ethan. The general took a breath. "Mr. Hale's formal designation," he said, "falls under Joint Special Operations Command, Strategic Intelligence Division." Gasps broke through the silence. GSOC. Even civilians recognized the acronym. Even if they didn't fully understand it, they knew what it meant: top tier, off the books, unanswerable to ceremony. The general's voice sharpened. While his operational title is restricted, his command equivalency is not. He reached into the folder once more. "For the purpose of clarity," he said, "Mr. Hale holds authority equivalent to a senior field-grade officer with cross-domain tasking privileges." It took a second for the meaning to land. Then it hit. Ethan's father stared at the general, lips trembling. That's not possible," he whispered. His mother couldn't speak at all. Mark's chest tightened. Senior field grade. Above captains, above majors, above him. The general turned slightly toward Ethan. "Mr. Hale," he said, By directive of the Joint Chiefs, your rank equivalency is hereby acknowledged. He paused. Lieutenant Colonel. The word echoed. Not shouted, not celebrated, spoken like a fact that could no longer be hidden. The reaction was delayed but devastating. A sharp intake of breath swept the stands. Officers exchanged looks. Civilians stared openly now, no longer caring about decorum. Phones lowered, forgotten. Lieutenant Colonel. Mark felt his knees lock. Ethan, his older brother, outranked nearly every officer present. Not in theory. In practice, the general stepped closer to Ethan. For years, he said, you declined formal recognition. Yes, sir, Ethan replied. You accepted demotion in appearance to preserve mission integrity. Yes, sir. You accepted silence, the general continued. While others stood in light, Ethan's jaw tightened just slightly. Yes, sir. The general nodded. Today, he said, turning back to the crowd, that silence ends, not for praise but for record. He raised his hand. Every uniformed officer in view reacted instantly. A synchronized salute snapped into place. The sound was unmistakable. Sharp, unified, absolute. Ethan returned it. Not hurried, not proud, precise. The crowd didn't applaud. They couldn't. Applause felt wrong here. This wasn't a victory lap. It was an exposure. Ethan's mother sank back into her seat, tears streaming freely now. Not of pride, not yet, but of shock. Of recognition, of regret too heavy to name. Mark swallowed hard. Everything he thought he knew about hierarchy, about sacrifice, about who had mattered, it all rearranged itself in a single breath. The general lowered his hand. This ceremony, he said, will continue as scheduled. Then, quieter, only for Ethan, report after conclusion. Ethan nodded. Around him, the world slowly restarted. Noise returned. Movement resumed. But nothing felt the same, because a rank once revealed could never be forgotten, and neither could the silence that had carried it for so long. The ceremony ended without another surprise. On paper, everything proceeded exactly as scheduled. The final commands were given. The colors were retired. Graduates were dismissed. Applause returned in careful, measured waves. Polite, respectful, but no longer carefree. Ethan stepped back from the center of the field and blended into the edges again. The shift was intentional. Attention had weight. He had learned to put it down the moment it was no longer required. Families flooded the parade ground, rushing toward their graduates with laughter and tears. Cameras clicked. Tridents were touched and retouched, as if confirming they were real. Pride spilled freely in all directions. Ethan stood still. For the first time, no one ignored him. People glanced at him with curiosity now, some with recognition, others with hesitation. A few officers nodded subtly as they passed. One stopped briefly, offered a quiet "sir," and moved on without waiting for acknowledgement. Ethan returned the nods but didn't engage. His parents approached slowly. They no longer looked certain of anything. His mother reached him first. Her eyes were red, unfocused, as if she were still catching up to reality. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally said, "Why didn't you tell us?" It wasn't accusation. It was confusion, raw and unguarded. Ethan considered the question carefully before answering. "You never asked," he said. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. His father arrived beside her, hands clenched at his sides. "That's not fair," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. We thought you left." "I did," Ethan replied. "I just didn't disappear." Silence settled between them. Mark approached last. He had removed his cover, his hair damp with sweat, the trident still catching the light. Up close, he looked younger than Ethan remembered. Less certain. "I didn't know," Mark said quietly. "I know," Ethan replied. Mark swallowed. "All those times, when I thought you just didn't measure up." Ethan looked at his brother, not with resentment, but with clarity. "You measured yourself against what you could see," he said. "That's not a failure. It's a limitation." Mark nodded slowly, absorbing that. Their mother wiped her cheeks. "We were so proud of him," she said, gesturing weakly toward Mark. "We didn't think there was room for both." Ethan exhaled. "There was," he said. "You just didn't make it." The truth landed heavily. No one argued. Around them, families laughed and cried, oblivious to the quiet reckoning unfolding in this small circle. A photographer nearly bumped into them, apologized, and moved on. Ethan felt his phone vibrate again. This time it wasn't a command. "Transport wheels up 1900, briefing en route." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "I won't be staying long," he said. His mother's head snapped up. "You're leaving?" "Yes." "When?" Mark asked. "Soon." His father stepped forward, hesitant now. Can we talk before you go?" Ethan met his eyes. "Not today," he said. Today was already full. The answer stung, but it wasn't cruel. It was honest. They walked with him toward the perimeter of the field. The closer they got to the exit, the quieter the noise became, until only the wind and distant voices remained. At the gate, Ethan stopped. His mother reached out, then hesitated, unsure if she was allowed. Ethan nodded once. She hugged him. It was awkward, careful. Too late to fix much, but not meaningless. "Be safe," she whispered. Ethan stepped back. "I always am." He turned and walked away. Behind him, his family stood together, changed, unsettled, no longer certain who he was, but unable to deny it either. Ahead of him, the base road stretched clean and empty. Ethan adjusted his jacket and kept walking, because some truths didn't end stories. They just made the next departure heavier. The transport vehicle moved without urgency. Its tires hummed against the road as the base receded behind tinted glass, the noise of celebration replaced by a steady, mechanical calm. Ethan sat alone in the rear seat, hands resting loosely on his thighs, eyes forward. He hadn't looked back. He rarely did. The driver didn't speak. He knew better. Silence wasn't awkward in this line of work. It was functional. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, not to rest, but to compartmentalize. The ceremony, the reveal, his family's faces as understanding collided with regret. All of it filed away, tagged, contained. Still, something lingered. Not pain. Weight. His phone vibrated again. This time, it was a call. He checked the ID before answering. "Go ahead." Colonel Mason's voice came through, low and controlled. "You're clear of the base?" "Yes." "Good. We'll debrief in the air. Minimal personnel." Ethan waited. Mason hesitated, a rare thing. "You handled it cleanly." "It wasn't an operation," Ethan said. "No," Mason agreed. "That's why it was harder." The line went quiet for a moment. "You didn't have to stay invisible as long as you did," Mason added. "There were options." "There were risks," Ethan replied. "Visibility changes variables." "And isolation," Mason said. Ethan didn't deny it. The vehicle slowed as it approached the airfield perimeter. Beyond the fence, a military transport aircraft sat ready, engines idling, heat rippling the air behind it. "Your family now knows," Mason said. "That can't be undone." "They know part of it," Ethan replied. "Enough." Mason exhaled. "You ever think about what it cost you?" Ethan watched a ground crewman guide the vehicle in with precise hand signals. "Yes," he said. "Just not during execution." The line disconnected. Ethan stepped out into the heat. The aircraft loomed ahead. Grey, utilitarian, unremarkable. No markings to suggest importance. No ceremony waiting. Just function. As he approached the ramp, a younger officer paused, eyes flicking up in recognition. He stiffened. "Sir." Ethan nodded once and kept moving. Inside the aircraft, the noise swallowed thought. He strapped in, feeling the familiar pull of gravity as the engine spooled higher. The vibration steadied his breathing. This, movement, purpose, anonymity was where he operated best. Yet the image of his mother's hands, trembling as she reached for him, surfaced again. Uninvited. He let it. Silence had protected lives, that much he knew. But silence also had consequences. It meant missed birthdays, funerals attended in the back row, conversations never corrected, because correcting them would raise questions. No one was allowed to answer. It meant watching your family build a version of you that was incomplete and letting them, because correcting the record would have required exposure, and exposure could get people killed. The aircraft lifted. Ethan stared at the floor as the base disappeared beneath cloud cover. He thought of Mark, of his brother standing tall, proud, believing he had finally surpassed the shadow of an older sibling who had failed to launch. The truth would rearrange that belief, but it wouldn't erase the work Mark had done to earn his place. That mattered. Ethan didn't want Mark diminished by the reveal. He wanted him informed. There was a difference. A secure tablet lit up on the seat across from him. A message appeared. "Briefing in 3 minutes. Joint theater update. High confidence threat vector." Duty reclaimed its space quickly. Ethan straightened, adjusting the straps, clearing the edges of his thoughts. Emotion was noted, logged, set aside. Still, as the aircraft climbed higher, he allowed himself one unguarded moment. He wondered, not for the first time, what it might have been like to be known without explanation, to sit in the front row without suspicion, to be praised without qualification. Then the briefing began, and the thought vanished, because silence had taken many things from him, but it had also given him something most people never carried: trust. And trust, once earned at that level, was heavier than any medal. He leaned forward as the first map illuminated the cabin. Whatever the cost, the work wasn't finished. The house was too quiet. Ethan's parents sat at opposite ends of the living room, the television muted, its flickering images ignored. Mark had gone for a walk, said he needed air, space, time. None of them argued. There was nothing left to argue with. Ethan's mother rose first. She moved, as if her body hadn't quite caught up with the day yet. Every step careful, deliberate. She walked down the hallway and stopped in front of a closet that hadn't been opened in years. The one they never talked about. She knelt with effort and pulled out a small metal lockbox. Its surface dulled with age. Her hands hesitated on the latch. Her husband appeared behind her, watching silently. "What are you doing?" he asked. She didn't answer. The latch clicked open. Inside were old documents, birth certificates, yellowed photographs, folded letters tied with a thin ribbon. At the bottom lay a single envelope, thicker than the rest, its edges worn soft. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Her father's. Her breath caught as she opened it. She read slowly at first, then faster. Then she had to sit down. Her husband crouched beside her. "What is it?" She handed him the letter without speaking. Minutes passed. The words inside were plain, direct, written by a man who had learned the cost of secrecy the hard way. "If you're reading this," the letter said, "then I failed to explain it while I was alive." He had served too. Not publicly, not proudly. Intelligence logistics during a war that never officially touched their hometown. He had watched friends disappear from records. Families told nothing. He had carried silence home and let it hollow him out. "I thought keeping my family away from it would protect them." The letter continued. "Instead, it made me distant, hard, afraid of questions." Her father had warned her, explicitly. "If your children choose service that requires silence," he wrote, "do not punish them for it. Do not mistake absence for failure, and do not let pride blind you to sacrifice that doesn't announce itself." Her mother covered her mouth. Her husband closed his eyes slowly, the letter shaking in his hands. "We did this," he said quietly. "Didn't we?" She nodded. They had built a narrative that made sense to them. One son who followed a visible path, one who didn't. One they could celebrate, one they could explain away. It had been easier than asking hard questions. Ethan's mother pressed the letter to her chest. "He tried to warn us." The front door opened softly. Mark stepped inside, pausing when he saw them on the floor. "What happened?" he asked. His mother looked up, eyes red. "Your grandfather," she said. "He knew." Mark frowned, kneeling beside them as she handed him the letter. He read it once, then again. "This sounds like Ethan," he said quietly. "Yes," his father replied. "It does." The realization settled heavily among them. They hadn't just misunderstood Ethan. They had inherited the misunderstanding. Mark stood abruptly. "I need to call him." His mother's heart jumped. "Now?" "Yes," Mark said. "Before we convince ourselves we don't deserve to." The call rang. Once, twice, then connected. "Ethan," Mark said, voice unsteady. "We found something." "A letter?" From Grandpa. A pause on the other end. "I know," Ethan replied. The simplicity of the answer stunned them. "You knew?" his mother asked, leaning closer. "Yes," Ethan said. "He sent me a copy years ago." Silence followed. "Why didn't you tell us?" his father asked. "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," Ethan replied calmly. "Not then." Mark swallowed. "Would it change anything now?" Another pause. "I don't know," Ethan said honestly. "That depends on what you do with it." His mother closed her eyes. "We were wrong," she said, voice breaking. "About you, about what strength looks like." "I'm not calling to settle that," Ethan replied. "I just wanted you to understand something." "What?" she whispered. "I didn't stay silent to punish you," Ethan said. "I stayed silent because someone had to." The call ended gently. No anger, no closure, just truth laid bare at last. They sat there long after, the letter between them like a bridge they had refused to cross. And for the first time they understood. The greatest cost of silence wasn't being unseen by the world. It was being unseen by the people who mattered most. The airport was quiet in the way only military terminals ever were. No vacation chatter, no rushing families, just low voices, clipped movements, and the hum of air systems working in the background. Ethan sat near the window, jacket folded neatly beside him, eyes tracking the slow crawl of a transport aircraft across the tarmac. He had arrived early. He always did. Footsteps approached, hesitant at first, then more certain. Ethan didn't turn. "Ethan," his mother's voice. He waited a beat before looking back. They stood together, his parents and Mark, slightly out of place among uniforms and gear. No one spoke for a moment. There was no script for this. "We weren't sure you'd agree to see us," his father said. "I didn't," Ethan replied. "I just didn't refuse." Mark let out a breath. "That feels fair." They moved closer, forming an uneven line in front of him. No one sat, Sitting would have implied comfort. His mother held the letter in both hands. The paper was creased now, softened from being read too many times in one night. "We read it again," she said. "This morning." Ethan nodded. "It holds up." Her eyes filled. "We spent years asking the wrong questions. And years not asking any at all," his father added. Ethan stood slowly, leveling the difference in height. The movement wasn't confrontational, but it wasn't yielding either. "You didn't ask," he said. "So I adapted." His mother flinched. "We thought you shut us out." "I did," Ethan replied. "After I realized being open made things harder for everyone." Mark shook his head. "You should have trusted us." Ethan looked at his brother carefully. "I trusted you with what I could," he said. "That was the limit." Silence stretched between them. No one argued, because there was nothing to disprove. His father cleared his throat. "We can't change what we did." "No," Ethan agreed. "But," his father continued, "we can change how we do things from here." Ethan studied him for a long moment. "This isn't a reset," Ethan said. "There's no starting over." His mother nodded quickly. "We know." "It's not forgiveness," Ethan continued. "That takes time and consistency." Mark stepped forward. "Then let us earn it." Ethan's gaze softened, just slightly. "Earning takes patience," he said, and silence. His mother almost smiled at that, then stopped herself. A boarding announcement echoed faintly through the terminal. Ethan checked his watch. 5 minutes, he said. Panic flickered across his mother's face. "Already?" "Yes." She hesitated, then spoke quickly. "I'm proud of you." The words landed differently than she expected. Not as relief, as weight. Ethan absorbed them, expression unreadable. "I don't need pride," he said gently. "I need honesty." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Then here it is. We were afraid of what we didn't understand, and we punished you for it." His father straightened. "That ends now." Ethan held his father's gaze. "We'll see," he said. "Not cruel, not hopeful, just accurate." Mark stepped forward, extending his hand. Not for a hug, for acknowledgement. Ethan looked at it, then took it firmly. No pull-in, no backslap, just pressure, respect. "That trident," Ethan said quietly. "You earned it." Mark's throat tightened. "So did you." Even if no one saw it, Ethan released his hand. A final boarding call sounded. Ethan picked up his jacket. His mother stepped forward instinctively, then stopped herself. She waited. Ethan closed the distance and embraced her. Brief, careful, controlled. "No clean salutes," he said quietly near her ear. "Some things don't end neatly." She nodded against his shoulder. He stepped back, turned, and walked toward the gate. This time, he didn't look back. Not because he didn't care, but because he had finally said what needed to be said. And some departures, once honest, didn't require witnesses. The aircraft leveled out above the clouds. The cabin lights dimmed, shifting the world into muted grey and soft amber. Most of the seats were empty. No chatter. No announcements beyond the essentials, just the steady, dependable hum of engines carrying people who didn't expect to be noticed when they arrived. Ethan sat by the window. Below him, the country stretched unseen. Cities, towns, homes stitched together by roads that never asked who protected them. He preferred it this way. Distance gave clarity. Altitude stripped things down to what mattered. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. No missed calls. One message waited. From his mother. "We put your photo back. Not in front, just with the rest." Ethan stared at the screen longer than he needed to. Not in front. With the rest. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't redemption. It was placement. He typed a reply, erased it, then settled on something simple. "That's enough." He turned the phone face down and looked out the window again. The clouds parted briefly, revealing a patch of ocean below. Dark, endless, indifferent. The sight reminded him of another horizon years ago, standing on the deck of a carrier at dawn, wind cutting through layers, knowing the mission would never be discussed afterward. That had been the moment he chose silence, not because he was ordered to, but because he understood what it preserved. Lives, systems, people who would never know his name, but would live full ones because of decisions made quietly. Behind him, an officer passed down the aisle, paused, then nodded. "Sir." Ethan returned the nod without turning fully. Rank still mattered, just not in the ways people thought. He closed his eyes briefly, not to sleep, but to acknowledge the shift. Something had changed. Not his work, not his responsibility, but the weight he carried alone. His family would never fully understand what he did. They didn't need to. Understanding wasn't the goal. Respect was, and respect had finally begun. Not as applause, not as pride, but as restraint, as listening. as the willingness to sit with discomfort instead of rewriting it. That was enough. The plane began its descent. Somewhere far below, a flag would be raised again the next morning. Someone would jog past it without thinking. A child would ask what it stood for and receive an answer. That was incomplete but sincere. Ethan adjusted in his seat as the landing lights flicked on. He would step off this aircraft and disappear into function again. Briefings, decisions, consequences. The work would continue, unseen and uncelebrated. And that was fine, because for the first time, the silence he carried didn't feel like exile. It felt chosen. The wheels touched down smoothly. As the aircraft slowed, Ethan stood, pulled on his jacket, and joined the quiet line moving toward the exit. Above the terminal doors, a flag hung motionless in the still air. Ethan paused beneath it, not to salute, not to acknowledge ceremony, but to stand, just for a moment, beneath the same symbol as everyone else. Not above, not below, just present. Then he stepped forward and disappeared into the crowd. A man whose rank had been revealed once, and never needed to be again.